Welcome to Livermore Indivisible's monthly general meeting. Today, we will go over the often confusing propositions and measures that will appear on our ballots within the next week or so. Warning, most of us are not lawyers, so this is our best attempt. Definitely go over the measures yourself, the propositions, and do your own research. But hopefully ours will help a bit. Okay, Karen? We're going to go over all of these propositions and measures. Proposition 1 is on abortion. It provides a state constitutional right to reproductive freedom, including the right to an abortion. Proposition 26 is gambling. Legalizes sports betting at Native American gaming casinos and licensed racetracks. Proposition 27, another gambling one, legalizes online, mobile sports betting outside tribal lands. Proposition 28 is on education, provides additional funding for arts and music education in public schools. Proposition 29, healthcare, requires on-site licensed medical profession, certain reporting and disclosure requirements at kidney dialysis clinics. Proposition 30, taxes and environment, increases personal income tax above $2 million by 1.75%. and dedicates revenue to zero emission vehicle projects and wildfire prevention programs. Proposition 31 on tobacco upholds the ban on flavored tobacco sales. Measure D for Alameda County enables expansion of wine production and equestrian facilities. Measure G, Livermore Education, school bond measure to upgrade classrooms and facilities with independent audit. And measure P, City of Livermore, amend South Livermore urban growth boundary policies to extend sewer. Proposition 1, which is mine, a yes vote. The California Constitution would be changed to expressly include existing rights to reproductive freedom, such that the right to choose whether or not, such as the right to choose whether or not to have an abortion or use contraceptives. A no vote, the California.
I'm not going to watch this. I can read this.
Pardon? A no vote, the California Constitution would not be changed to expressly include existing rights to reproductive freedom. These rights, however, would continue to exist under other state law. Okay, the current abortion rights, which will remain no matter what. The right to abortion care is absolute in California under these two conditions. The fetus is not yet viable, likely to sustain survival outside the uterus without extraordinary medical measures around the 23rd week of pregnancy, and must be determined by medical doctors, or the procedure is necessary to protect the life or health of the mother. Once viability is attained, abortion as a reproductive right is only legal when necessary for the life or health of the mother, and may be performed only by qualified medical professionals. Underage women have the same right to an abortion as adult women, and it is unconstitutional to require parental consent. Governor Newsom signed a bill that mandates state licensed health insurers to cover all abortion costs. Okay, the background. It is Proposition 1 came about. It was proposed to protect the right to abortion and contraceptives from future political changes in the state. And it places the right to refuse abortion or contraceptives in the Constitution, which protects from former practices of forced sterilization. Adding reproductive rights to the state constitution makes it more difficult for future lawmakers to eliminate or change those rights. It places the arguments for it, places the fundamental right to abortion and contraception in the Constitution, which again makes it more difficult to change than if it were just a law. It protects individual choices on reproductive care and the right to choose to have an abortion, keeping medical decisions where they belong between a patient and their provider. Supporters are yes on Prop 1, protect abortion rights, California Medical Association, Planned Parenthood affiliates of California, and the League of Women Voters of California. Arguments against. It is an extreme law that allows the late-term abortions at taxpayer expense up to the moment of birth, even if the baby is healthy and the mother's health is not threatened. Current California law already guarantees a woman's right to choose, making this an extreme and costly proposal. Those who are endorsing the against view, no on Proposition 1, Dr. Anne Marie Adams, who is a gynecologist, Tack Allen, who is president of the International Faith-Based Coalition, and Assembly member Jim Patterson. The argument against abortion, I have found no evidence whatsoever that the right to reproductive care placed in the Constitution would overturn the law that says, no, you can't have an abortion when the baby is full term. So it's highly unlikely that the first argument here would have any effect on the present law. Also, we don't put the fiscal change in here. There should be no fiscal change other than one of the arguments against is if people flood because they can suddenly have abortions at 9 months with a healthy baby in California, if that were true, that people would flood into our state from other states to do this because it wouldn't be legal anywhere else, as it is not legal here right now. Okay, and next we're going to be talking about 26 and 27, and Marla is doing that.
Yeah, did anyone have any questions for
sorry.
Helen, first of all?
Okay.
No questions, okay.
Okay, let me ask one thing. So what happens if the federal actually bans entire abortion?
That we don't, I personally don't know. I think the federal constitution would supersede state, but I think we would also have a lot more to stand on if it was part of our state constitution. And I don't know, does anyone else, any lawyers out there know? I was having trouble finding that information.
I think it depends on whether or not you're talking about a federal law passed or whether or not you're talking about the Supreme Court doing something. I think one might have more effect than the other.
Right.
But I'm not a lawyer, so I couldn't say much more than that. But I think there could be two different questions there.
Yeah.
The most recent Supreme Court ruling said it's the state's decision. So if the federal passed something and our state law were different, our state law would supersede that based on the state's decision, or the Supreme Court's decision, which itself is probably bad.
Well, but there are, as I understand it, and maybe I'm wrong about this, there are more abortion questions that may come before the Supreme Court, so they may not be done clamping
Right.
on this. So stay tuned, it is kind of my impression.
And some senators have mentioned making more restrictions or restricting more things through via the Supreme Court that have already happened.
Yeah, so, yeah.
We need to let the right people to be senators and that, and so forth. Anyway, okay, Marla.
No more questions again on Prop 1? Okay, my name is Marla Kirby. I'm going to talk about Propositions 26 and 27. I remember at the beginning of the summer, I started seeing all these ads for talking about Indian gambling, Native American casinos, who was for and against, and hearing these different claims and had no idea what they're talking about. Once I started looking more into these propositions, at least on the surface level, I think I was even more confused because I didn't understand why we have two propositions on the ballot. They both would allow sports betting in California. The text of each proposition is quite long. I don't know if you've looked at the voter information guide, but it's about 30 pages just on those two propositions, the language of them, the text. And we've seen all these ads and confusing claims about what each does or doesn't do. So I'm going to talk today a bit about about them both. So I'll start with a brief description of each, and then go into the history and background and current landscape for legal gambling in California, and then talk about more particular issues with regard to sports betting itself. And then arguments for and against each proposition, and then finally talk about why we're voting on these now and some concluding remarks. So Proposition 26, a yes vote on that would mean that California would permit in-person sports betting by the four privately operated horse racetracks in California, as well as tribal casinos. So this means that the person making the bet would have to be there physically present at those locations in order to place that bet. It would only allow persons aged 21 and older at the racetrack. And the racetracks would be required to pay a 10% tax. The casinos themselves would be subject to a tribal state compact that would sort of govern some of these issues. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. As a result of this proposition, a new fund, the California Sports Wagering Fund, would be established, into which the proceeds from these bets would go. The types of bets would be just sporting events themselves, but no high school or California college sporting events would be allowed, or bets on those. Also, Prop 26 would allow tribal casinos to offer roulette and dice games, which they currently are not permitted to do. So it'd be an expansion of the tribal casinos gaming offerings. And there'd also be a new private right of action to enforce state gambling laws, which means that anyone can sue a civil action, anyone else in California who's engaging in illegal gambling, after you request the state attorney general to commence action. And if the AG doesn't do it within 90 days, then anyone can sue in a civil action. And I'll talk more about that later too, because this is kind of an important issue. But obviously a no vote on Prop 26 means, the gambling and sports betting in particular would not change from the way it is now in California. Prop 27, a yes vote on Prop 27 would mean California would permit online sports betting. So this would mean through mobile devices and through the internet, by people who are 21 years of age or older. And the events covered in Prop 27 is broader than just sports, even though I refer to sports betting here as sort of a shorthand. I think that's kind of generally how it's referred to, but the actual language of the proposition allows for broader than just sports events. It's like award shows and video game competitions. Those would also be included, but specifically excluded are youth sports events. So, and this would permit the online sports betting in California, but outside of tribal land. So it wouldn't be at tribal casinos at all. It would be outside of the tribal lands, but it would be offered by online sports betting platform providers, as well as tribal casino partners that they would have to have here in California. So these online sports betting platform providers are required by this proposition to operate in at least 10 states. So they have to be pretty good sized gambling companies to be eligible for this, as well as be required to pay a pretty high licensing approval fee of $100 million in advance. And then a 10 million 5-year renewal fee. So every 5 years, they'd have to pay a $10 million renewal fee. And the tribes who want to offer the online sports betting would have to pay a $10 million advance and a $1 million renewal fee. And plus there would be
computer.
Excuse me? Could everyone else be on mute, please?
Okay, so I'm gonna.
So let's see, where was I? So they would have to pay, so there'll also be the advance fees, the renewal fees, plus a 10% tax. And the money from all of this would go to funds that would, after deducting state regulatory costs, 85% of which would go toward a homelessness programs and gambling addiction programs. And then the remaining 15% would go to non-gaming tribes. Prop 27 would also create a new unit within the California Department of Justice, which would regulate online sports betting. It would set up requirements for getting a license, decide what type of events and bets are allowed, and investigate illegal activities. And there would be some other new enforcement mechanisms, like establishing an advisory committee to make recommendations on implementation and things like that. So again, a no vote would mean sports betting would continue to be illegal, and there'd be no changes to the way state gambling laws are enforced. So just as a brief note of comparison between the two, Prop 26 is in-person sports betting only at tribal casinos and the 4 privately operated horse race tracks. The proposition itself was written and paid for by the biggest tribal casinos in California. Proposition 27, on the other hand, would allow online sports betting outside of tribal lands and was written and paid for by online sports betting platform providers. So key distinction between the two. So why are we voting on this now? California has outlawed many forms of gambling since soon after statehood, other than card rooms or poker clubs, which have been common throughout state history. So I have this image of the Wild West and miners, in a smoke-filled saloon playing poker. That sort of thing has been allowed under state law, and gradually, but all other gambling was, not permitted under state law. But some types of gambling have been permitted over the years. In 1933, the state authorized wagering on horse races. In 1976, bingo games for charitable purposes started to be allowed. And then in 1984, the California lottery was started. So there've been gradual increases in the types of gambling that's considered legal in California. In the 1980s, some Native American tribes in California that had started to offer bingo and card game operations. And the state and some counties especially ones that had card rooms already, started to take notice and tried to shut them down as violating state law. And the one case that California brought against the Cabazon Band of Mission Indians went all the way to the Supreme Court in 1987, where it was decided that because of tribal sovereignty, the Indian tribes are considered their own sovereign and the state can't regulate them. only to the extent allowed by federal law, because the federal government maintains the right to regulate commerce and relations with so-called foreign nations, which an Indian, Native American tribes are considered to be. And so the court ruled that Indian gaming could only be challenged if the gambling itself was deemed criminal by state law. And because these, bingo and card games were offered outside of Indian tribes, the Indian tribes could also offer them as well. So as a result of this ruling in 1987 by the Supreme Court, Congress stepped in to set up a framework for tribal gaming operations to try to balance the state and tribal interests, and required states to enter into tribal state compacts, which I referred to earlier, which will set out what types of gambling can be offered in each state and so forth. And in California, we have Native American tribes that operate 66 casinos in 28 counties under these tribal state compacts. But we also, the state has compacts with 79 tribes total at this point. And tribal casinos in California bring in about $9 billion in annual revenue, which is about 25% of the nationwide Native American gaming revenue. So it's a big market in California. It's a big part of the nationwide Indian gaming revenue. So next slide, Karen. So with regard to sports betting in particular, in the early 1990s, Congress was concerned that sports gambling was becoming a national problem, which threatened the integrity of sports games, and they were concerned about the prevalence of sports gambling among youth. And so they passed the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act of 1992, which restricted all but a handful of states from legalizing sports gambling, so gambling on sporting events. And this PAPSA, as it's known, was largely considered ineffective because the estimated market for sports gambling in 2018 was about $150 billion. That's even when it was largely illegal. Gambling itself has become more common with the increase in Native American casinos. And there's been a concern that illegal gambling providers have been capitalizing on the state prohibition, and states aren't able to gain some of the revenue from the amount of gambling that's occurring. And so with the financial downturn in 2008, 2009, states started to look at expanding revenue opportunities. And one of them was the sports betting industry. And so New Jersey passed a referendum, and ultimately another state law which ratified it, for sports betting. And it was challenged by the major sporting organizations, including the NCAA. And that case went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court struck it down, saying that under the anti-commandeering doctrine, which is under the 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which basically says that federal statutes cannot compel states to enforce federal law, that Congress couldn't issue direct orders to state legislatures to not have sports gambling, and so it struck down this law. And so since then, started in New Jersey. What started in New Jersey didn't stay in New Jersey for very long, because right now, just 4 years later, over 30 states are now permit sports betting. Most of those states, 22, allow online and mobile sports betting, and 5 states only permit tribal casino operators to offer sports betting. And the age requirements among these states vary from 18 or 21. And so it's become a really big business. So between June 2018 and November 2020, 2021, states with sports betting operations received about $700 million in taxes, additional taxes from it. It's been estimated. Next page, or next slide, Karen. So you can see here the states that are offering currently in the red. The ones that are red are ones that are currently operating sports betting. And the ones that are sort of pinkish have authorized it, but they're just not operational yet. So that's another handful of states. And then the rest don't offer it. And California is the only one that's really considering it this year, among the others that don't have it yet. Let's see. So with regard to sports betting itself, there's concerns about it hasn't been studied a lot, but they're starting to study, as opposed to gambling in other forms, because it's a fairly new legal activity. And there was just a recent study in the Addictive Behaviors Journal, just out this month, actually October 2022, in which experts found that sports betting can create problems worse than traditional gaming, like casino and cards. What they said was sports betting relative to non-sports betting has been more strongly linked to gambling problems and cognitive distortions related to illusions of control, probability control, and interpretive control. So what they mean by this is that for some people, because sports gamblers tend to follow the teams and may even, be very devoted to their teams, they feel like they have an edge and a greater control over the outcome of the games. And they know the teams, and they feel like it's different psychologically than other types of gambling. So not necessarily betting to make money, but to look smarter. And also the thing with sports betting is that there's a 50-50 chance. So one team will win. So you have a higher odds than other types of betting. So despite these sort of concerns with sports betting, this study also showed that there's some evidence that treatment can be more successful than with other addictions, especially early treatment. Is, they're not quite sure why that is. It could be the type of person that does this, or sports betting. They're not quite sure yet. It's still early days in studying it. So it's interesting, what they're finding at this point. With online sports betting, there are additional concerns, such as the speed of the technology, which allows you to place bets really rapidly, as well as the use of data in targeting people who might be addicted or regular sports gamblers. Online gaming platform providers say they're developing programs to educate and help users, and some states place limits. So in Michigan, for example, they have a self-exclusion option in which bettors can limit themselves from betting online for a certain period of time. So there are ways to get around it. But it's still, a much easier way to place bets than obviously having to go to a casino or be physically present to place your bet. And there's also the concern about access by minors to the online sports betting. And I didn't put a point on this as well, but there's also, the concern about with sports betting, the potential corruption in sports, and the role of organized crime and illegal sports betting, where it's used to launder money, which may be an argument for or against regulation, I guess you could say. So getting to that point, so for Proposition 26, so with that kind of background, hopefully it kind of laid out what we're looking at here. Proposition 26, arguments in favor. So again, this is in-person sports betting at tribal casinos and the racetracks. The arguments in favor would be bring more business to tribal casinos, increasing their self-sufficiency, create tribal jobs, and pay for services they need. There'd be protection against underage gambling because you have to be physically present to make the bet. And then it would be a way to start regulating sports betting, which currently is illegal in California, as I said. The funds also would be counted as part of the state general fund, which is used to establish the minimum amount spent on schools. And then there'd be some amount that would go toward other state priorities, as well as mental health research and gambling regulation. So supporters are, as you might expect, the 16 Native American tribes that have casinos, essentially, and then others, Dolores Huerta, some unions, the lieutenant governor, the treasurer, the California Young Democrats, the California District Attorneys Association, and there are others. There's a long list you can see on the Yes on 26 website. The California Democratic Party is neutral on Prop 26. The arguments against Prop 26. So the provision about the private right of action, which I talked about initially, is being challenged by the card rooms as a way for the tribal casinos to put them out of business. So what they're saying is they think that they think that the tribal casinos put that in because they want to be able to challenge what types of games card rooms can offer. And it's not a theoretical thing, because it's been an ongoing source of litigation between the two groups for a long time. The casinos have alleged that some of the types of so-called banked games that the card rooms are offering violate the exclusivity that casinos have on those types of games. And so it's been an ongoing source of dispute. And so there's a big concern by the card rooms about the casinos using this private right of action to basically put them out of business. It also would hurt, local municipalities that rely on the card rooms for revenue. So currently there are 88 card rooms operating in 32 counties, and there's 2 here in Livermore. I don't know if you know, I've driven by them. I've never been in them. I don't really know much about them, but I did find out on the city website that their Park West Casino 580 is listed among the major businesses of Livermore. So I had no idea. So presumably Livermore could lose some money if the arguments against are correct, that it would drive more business to casinos, and then casinos could also use this private right of action to restrict card rooms, what card rooms are doing, or drive them out of business. And the no on Prop 26 says they estimate a loss of $500 million in local tax revenue and 32,000 jobs statewide. I don't know if that's true, but that's what they say. Also, another argument against that 18-year-olds could be allowed to gamble on the casinos, because that would be governed by the terms of the tribal state compact. The proposition itself doesn't restrict the casinos in that respect. It'd have to be negotiated as part of the tribal state compact. Another argument against it is that it could revive the shrinking horse racing industry, because it would permit the sports betting at the live horse race tracks in California. And it would permit sports betting without a thorough legislative framework. So for example, opponents say it doesn't do anything to protect tribal casino workers or require the casinos to be subject to California worker protection laws. So issues like that. And there would be the increased betting revenues would not be that great, and probably offset by other costs. The state legislative analyst is estimating tens of millions of dollars in new revenue, but not all of that, in revenue, but not all of that maybe new, because some of it could be just money that would have been spent on something else is being spent on sports betting. So it's hard to know, and it's hard to know what the cost would be in regulating a whole new gaming industry of sports betting. Okay, Arguments in favor of Prop 27, which again is the online sports betting administered by large online gaming platform providers, along with their California tribal casino partners, would bring in money to the state, potentially several hundred million, because those advance fees, as I said before, are pretty substantial. The money would be allocated to provide resources to address homelessness, mental health issues, and addiction. The supporters say it's the only permanent funding solution for homelessness and mental health crises. And then the remaining money would be given to, would be set aside for non-gaming tribes to help them, become more self-sufficient as well. And then it would provide, they say they would provide protections against underage gambling, and it also prohibits betting on youth sports. There would also be additional substantial fines for regulators, and it would require the California Department of Justice strictly regulate and include funding for addiction treatment. So that the groups that are in favor of Proposition 27, just, it's a handful of the Native American tribes, mostly the ones that don't have their own large casino operations. Then, of course, the large online gaming companies that are based out of, not in California, Major League Baseball, Bay Area Community Services, and Mayor Libby Schaaf, among others. And you can look on the Yes on Prop 27 website to see more. Prop 27 arguments against. So only the large online gaming platforms could get a license because of the requirements. As I said before, they have to operate in 10 other states in order to qualify, as well as make the $100 million advance payment. So, there are only a few, from what I understand, out of state, large corporations basically that could meet those requirements. And so most of the benefit would go out of state and drive business away from tribal casinos. That's the argument against. It's not a solution to homelessness. And one thing that sort of bothers me is the very name in Prop 27 that is given. If you look in the voter information guide, it is the California Solutions to Homelessness and Mental Health Support Act. That's the name of the act, which to me seems pretty disingenuous. That's not the point of this proposition. But it would require, so it's not a solution to homelessness, and the people who argue against it say that it required much more money to actually deal with homelessness, and California has already spent a lot more than that on it. It's bad public policy to fund homelessness and mental health programs with an activity that itself could exacerbate those problems. And they point to the California lottery that was supposed to help close the education funding gap, but it still hasn't done that decades later. So, and then there's also the dangers of online sports gambling to minors and compulsive gamblers that we talked about. And it would permit sports betting again without a thorough legislative framework. And moreover, it would shortchange schools and other state priorities, because the funds wouldn't go toward the state general fund. It would go in this special fund that would be set aside for homelessness, mental health programs, and then other, the non-gaming tribes. So the opponents include, most of the tribal casinos and other Native American tribes, the California Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the Teachers Association, LA Times, East Bay Mercury News. You can see more at No on 27. So why are we even voting on this, given how complicated they are, and there's the fact that there's two of them? Why are we even voting on these? Well, shortly after the Supreme Court decision in 2018, in 2019, a couple of state legislators introduced a bill to crack down on illegal, what they said to crack down and crack down on illegal gaming, sports gaming, and replace it with a safe and responsible option, which is how they described it. And the other legislator, said that noted that all their gaming activities in California are subject to regulation, so to ensure the safety of consumers. And so sports wagering should be treated no differently. So this bill kind of was worked through these couple of legislators, but then it was basically put on hold because the competing interests, basically the tribal casinos and the card room, mostly the tribal casinos were against it because it would have allowed the card rooms to have certain kinds of games, the very games that the casinos have been fighting with the card rooms about. It would have basically said, oh, this is okay for the card rooms to do. So they didn't like that. And it also would have permitted online sports gambling, although it could have been offered on tribal casinos as well. But it would have definitely challenged the tribal casinos' large share of the state's gambling dollars for now. So the way I looked at it, I mean, I didn't see the text of the bill that was being proposed, but the way it was described in articles that I read about it was sort of a hybrid between Prop 26 and 27 because it allowed both in-person and online gaming, and it would have certain requirements, the advanced fee, license fees, not quite as high as Prop 27. So presumably more casinos and others could get involved in it. It's dead now because the state legislators who proposed it wanted to see what happened with these propositions. The propositions got on the ballot before they could work out the compromises on it. So the other thing I found out that I'm not sure if it's a cause or effect of the animosity between tribal casinos and card rooms, but since 1995, there's been a moratorium on local jurisdictions from expanding gambling operations of card rooms. And that's been renewed annually every year since 1995, as I understand it. And then this year, in fact, just in September of 2022, the state legislature failed to pass a bill that would have extended it. And so now it's set to expire January 1st, 2023. It's unclear what effect this would have, but likely, card rooms could be expanded. And again, it would cut into, I'm sure the casinos are concerned about that. Although the senator who proposed the bill thought it would be unlikely there'd be new card rooms because it would take a few years for that to establish. And I think they want to try to allow for more growth for the card rooms and a longer moratorium period. So it's not an annual thing. Apparently it's been an annual thing for all these years. And there's been a lot of lobbying by card rooms and casinos for the legislature to approve or not approve the moratorium. And so it's been kind of an annual thing, like a persistent problem for them. So we'll see where that goes. I don't know what will happen. Depending on what happens with these propositions, I guess we could see what happens with that. And that is the other question. What happens if both propositions pass? So if both pass, theoretically, they could both go into effect. And Proposition 27 has specific language that says these are intended to be complementary, and they would both, would go into effect. But there could be legal challenges if there are found to be provisions that could be in conflict. And if they're in conflict, then my understanding is the one that got the greater percentage of the vote would take precedence. So it's kind of unclear what would happen if both were to pass. Right now, the polling doesn't indicate that would be the case, but you never know, I guess. So in conclusion, so this was kind of a long-winded, I hope you guys learned something from, because I did. I'm not a sports fanatic, and I don't know, I'm not a gambler either, so I didn't know anything about this. area, and I didn't realize how big of a deal it was. Sports betting is big business. It's estimated that 47 million Americans will place at least one bet on the NFL this season, which to me is kind of astounding. And if California were to enter this market, which it could if either of these propositions pass or if the state bill is reenacted, it would be, it was estimated it could be the second biggest sports gambling market in the world, just after the UK. So it's a big deal. Prop 26 would bring in only modest tax revenue, but would help tribal casinos. Or Prop 27 could be more lucrative for the state, but it offers other potential problems with the online aspect of it. And then just the general question of sports betting itself and, the concerns about that, which I talked about. So that is all I have. Does anyone have any questions after all of that?
I have a question, Marla. This is Karen.
Mhm.
How are they going with Proposition 27? How are they going to ensure that they're not going to allow minors online with sports betting?
I don't know the actual mechanics of it, how they would do that. I'm assuming they would do things like, if you require, some kind of, credit card, of course. So you would think it should be someone that's of age. I don't know how they would do it. I think it's already a problem, though, to be honest. And I talked to my kids who are into video gaming. They say they know video game streamers that promote gambling to their followers who are young people. So I think it's already out there. I just don't know what they would do and what other states are doing currently to prevent minors from engaging in it. I don't know that there's an easy solution to it. I don't think it could be protected entirely, I guess is my point, but there could be some precautions taken.
Karen, thank you for this lengthy presentation on a difficult topic. I believe you mentioned this, but I wanted you just to restate it because it is important to me. Did you say that the ban on sports betting increased net sports betting illegally? So could you repeat that? What happened after the initial ban on sports betting? Did it actually decrease the sports bets being placed nationally?
Well, sports betting was banned in 1992 under the federal law. And I think at that time, I don't know the actual numbers, but I think what the experience was over time was that gambling itself became more accepted with the rise in, tribal casinos and all of that. And by the time of 2018, when and maybe with the rise of the internet too, because there could be online gambling taking place. But by 2018, by the court decision, it was estimated to be $150 billion. And it was legal, I should say, sports betting was legal in a handful of states. It sort of grandfathered in some states, like I think it was, Nevada for sure, Oregon, Montana, and I think there was one other. But so there was some legal sports betting, but it wasn't most of the states. So I don't know exactly what the numbers were in 1992. I know that they were concerned about it, but I'm sure it wasn't as big as it was in 2018 at 150 billion. But I don't know that it was caused by, and in fact, I don't think it was caused by the fact that it was illegal. I think it just became more accepted.
I think I misheard you initially, so I appreciate you clarifying.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else have any questions?
Just thanks for the history lesson. That was kind of complicated.
Yeah, like I said, I didn't know anything about it, so I thought I need to understand this a little better. So
Thanks.
you're welcome. So now next will be Joanne to talk about Proposition 28.
Hi. Okay, so Prop 28 is about funding for arts education in public schools, grades K through 12. And a yes vote would provide additional funding for arts education. It would distribute funding according to a formula based on enrollment and equity. It requires funding to be used primarily to hire new arts staff. It allows school principals to determine how the funds are spent, requires annual data reporting by local governing school boards, and it does not increase taxes. A no vote allows arts programs to remain as they are. It would keep the constitutionally required amount of funding for public schools and community colleges that we already have, and it would not increase state costs. So as it is now, barely 1 in 5 public schools has a full-time arts or music teacher. That deprives millions of students of a well-rounded education. Additional funding for arts and music education would be provided under this without raising taxes. Strict accountability and transparency provisions would safeguard the funds. And we know that arts and music education improves mental health and social development in students. Also helps prepare students for good jobs in California's economy. Prop 28 is supported by California for Arts and Music in Public Schools, California Teachers Association, and California State PTA. And there's no argument that has been submitted against this proposition. So to explain a little bit, right now, state law requires schools to provide instruction in visual and performing arts to all students in grades 1 through 6. But those courses are only offered as electives in grades 7 and 8. In high school, there's a little different situation where students have to complete 1 year of either 1 visual or performing arts, 2 a foreign language, or 3 career technical education, CTE, in addition to the core subjects. And in about half of the state schools, students have to take 1 year of visual and performing arts, which cannot be fulfilled with foreign language or CTE coursework. So Proposition 28 would mean that beginning next year, the state would provide additional funding to increase arts instruction or programs in public schools K through 12. And the amount required would equal 1% of the constitutionally required state and local funding that public schools received the year before. So this funding would be considered a payment above the constitutionally required amount of funding for public schools and community colleges. And the additional funding would be distributed to public schools based on enrollment in preschool and K through 12. Of the total amount, 70% would go to schools based on their share of statewide enrollment. The remaining 30% would go to schools based on their share of low-income students enrolled statewide. So that would provide more equity to the funding program. Now, it requires also that schools have to certify that the funds were spent in addition to the existing funding for arts education programs. It also requires at least 80% of the additional funding to be used to hire staff. That's in schools of 500 or more students, I believe. The remaining funding could be used for training supplies and materials and for arts educational partnership programs. The schools will have 3 years to spend the funds they receive each year. And then the Department of Education would reallocate any unspent funds to all schools the following year. The proposition requires local governing bodies like our school board to certify each year that the funding their schools received was spent on arts education. Additionally, local governing boards have to post on their website a report on how funds were spent. This report must also be submitted to the Department of Education and made public on the department's website. So this, beginning next year, would increase state costs by about $1 billion annually. That's less than 0.5% of the state's total general fund budget. And the money would come from the general fund. It would not be a new tax that's added. And the additional funding would be considered a payment, as I said, above the constitutionally required amount of funding for public schools and community colleges. So I think that's the end of my slides, right?
I have a question, Joanne.
Yeah.
If Proposition 28 is approved, how long does it last? What is the term of it lasting forever?
I believe, yeah, it doesn't have a sunset provision.
Okay,
It
thank
will
you.
be an ongoing funding program. Anybody else? There's been, a lot of support for this. I know that our Congresswoman Barbara Lee supports it. She's been appearing with Californians for the Arts and Music in Public Schools organization. And I'm really interested in this because I don't know how many of you know, I sing in an a cappella chorus, and we're part of Sweet Adelines International, which is an arts education institution. So we're always looking at the schools to provide the support that kids need to have arts programs, arts and music. It's really so important for development, self-esteem. It just really makes a person well-rounded. Okay, so Helen is going to take over and talk about Prop 29.
Hello again.
Oh, thank you, Joanne.
Okay, Proposition 29 is the dialysis bill. If it sounds familiar, we voted on this in 2018 and 2020. A yes vote requires that a physician, nurse practitioner, or physician's assistant with 6 months relative experience be on site during treatment at outpatient kidney dialysis clinics at every moment that it's open. Authorizes the exemption for staffing shortages if qualified medical professional is available through telehealth, but that exemption is only good for a year. It requires clinics to disclose to patients all physicians with clinic ownership interest of 5% or more, so they know who owns the clinic they're going to. And it requires clinics to report dialysis-related infection data to the state. It also prohibits clinics from closing or substantially reducing services without state approval, and prohibits clinics from refusing to treat patients based on source of payment. The payments, as
all of us who have varied medical plans know Medicare, Medicaid pay very differently than private medical plans. A no vote, no change to existing dialysis clinic regulations. Okay, so background. The California Department of Public Health licenses clinics using federal regulations as a basis for licensing. Federal regulations require each clinic has a board certified physician as medical director who is responsible for quality assurance, staff education and training, and development, implementation of policies and procedures. However, there is no regulation about the amount of time this person is present at the clinic, but it is considered about a 1/4 of a full-time position on average. Medicare requires clinics to report specific dialysis-related infection information to a network at the CDC, including when patient develops a bloodstream infection and the suspected cause of infection. However, it is unclear how often reports must be made. In the proposal, the new proposal, in Proposition 29, it's needs to be reported every 3 months to the states, to the state. The fiscal effects of Prop 29. It increases clinic costs by several $100,000 annually per clinic on average. Clinics could deal with this by negotiating increased rates with payers, particularly private insurance. As I already mentioned, they pay more. But the vast majority of dialysis patients are on Medicaid or Medicare because it's one of those things that allows you to be on Medicare regardless of age. It reduces they could reduce their profits or they could close some clinics. The possible increased cost for state and local governments likely in the tens of millions of dollars annually. Increased administrative costs for the California Department of Public Health are estimated to be in the low millions of dollars annually and would be covered by increasing the licensing fees paid by the clinics. So, arguments for: patients need safe, regulated clinics overseen by trained medical doctors, nurse practitioners, or physician assistants. One comment about because there are so many patients relative to the number of clinics available, many clinics are open 6 days a week and often more than normal working hours. Clinics are big business and have the money to improve their care. And increasing transparency will allow patients to make informed choices about their care, which is why they would like to know if doctors own a portion of the clinic. Groups 4 are Californians for Kidney Dialysis Protection, Peace and Freedom Party, and the SEIUHW West, which is a union. The arguments against: clinics are already regulated by state and federal. Professionals will be drawn away from patients into basically administrative positions because the regulation for having a professional there is to be there. The clinics are already required to have a registered nurse present when patients are there. And lack of trained people will cause clinics to close, making access more difficult. From what I have read, it would be very difficult to provide the trained people to staff these clinics. We already know we have shortages in medical care across the board. And this is a very small specialization. People against are the Republican Party of California, American Academy of Nephrology, California Chamber of Commerce, California Medical Association, California Taxpayer Protection Committee, and the National Hispanic Medical Association. And Karen?
Helen, I have a question.
Yeah.
Why hasn't, since we've already voted on it twice, I think someone else is maybe asking this question too. Why isn't the legislature acting on this issue if it's a concern?
Okay. We have voted on this 3 times. I think from what I have read, the legislature doesn't want to get into it. This is brought, according to an article I read in the Chronicle, it is assumed that these people are, that the people bringing this proposition want a larger base to negotiate with the clinics, not that they really think this is going to pass. Because the first time it was proposed, the people, the groups in favor of it were, which were basically, sorry, unions, put a lot of money into it. They lost that one by 60% of the voters. The second time in 2020, they put half the money into it and lost by 63% of the voters. This time, apparently, they put very little into it, but they think that the money that the clinics are paying to defeat it will sort of wear them out and give the technicians or the unions a larger bargaining chip to make the clinics amenable to unionizing. They would like to unionize them. And I think the legislature, as far as is staying out of it. Another comment about the need is, from what I have read, even if a doctor is present, doctors have to spend at least a minimum of 1 day a month with their patients while they are in dialysis. So there are doctors, not regularly, but at the facility. And there is nothing, if there's anything goes wrong during dialysis, 911 is called. There's really nothing you can do to take care of whatever is wrong in the clinic itself. And anyway, any other questions? I really don't know about this legislature, but what I've read, they're kind of steering clear of this. Another comment is, I saw an article, I believe it was in the Chronicle within the last week or two, that over 80% of people, voters, do not feel competent to vote on medical issues like this and would prefer not to because they don't understand them. Any other questions?
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
This is Linda Lamro. I'm a retired nurse of 42 years. I was a discharge planning nurse at Kaiser, and we got a lot of patients that that had line infections all the time. And what really upset me about this is they're saying that they need to report an infection, but it's kind of nebulous on how often they have to do that. My feeling is, when I was in nursing school in the 60s and early 70s, we had a registered nurse in every clinic, in the dialysis clinics. My experience since then, and I've been retired a few years now, is that, and at the time later I did home health, we went in and we taught the dialysis clinics, the nurses there, the LPNs, how to change the wound care because these people are, more than half of them are diabetics. We just need to get, money given to Diabetic Association and eliminate this. So but the problem is that as I went on in home health and when I became a discharge planner up at Kaiser in the early 2000s, there were medical assistants in most of the clinics. There was not an RN, there was an LPN. They couldn't do wound care anymore. So that put more of a burden on home health to go out twice a day and do wound care with these patients that are under Medicare. And we had so many patients that we had to see, and then we had to subcontract out. They're not run correctly. These people don't, I'm not saying that all of them are run that way, but they're not educationally able to make a lot of these decisions. So the whole proposition's written wrong. You don't need a physician assistant there or a doctor, but you need a registered nurse. You don't even need a nurse practitioner there. But I've just seen time and time and again. And then the other thing I had to do as a discharge planning nurse is I had to do what was called a dialysis chair. And a lot of the renal doctors would tell the patients, well, you're going to have this or you're going to die. Well, they're like 88 years old, right? They haven't talked to them about other options. These 88-year-olds, I'm getting dialysis chairs, and I'm in Kaiser Vallejo, dialysis chairs up in Vacaville for 6 a.m. for the elderly wife to drive the 88-year-old husband up there 3 times a week. So it's way more than this proposition. The dialysis care is not good in the clinics, not because they're not working hard, but they do need to do something about it. And I'm just letting you know some of the background that I've seen, how it's progressively gotten worse.
Thanks, Linda. And that, because I came in this nothing about it, but from what you, well, one, I did read that they are required to have registered nurses there. Apparently requirements and actually being there are 2 different things. But with this proposition, from what you say, it doesn't sound as though it would help the situation.
Well, the way it's written, I mean, as it is, and I don't know how many doctors there are here, but after I've lived in 4 other states. The California Medical Facility, when I first moved here I moved here in 79, I couldn't believe how few nurse practitioners there were. But apparently the CMA at that time was basically not welcoming physician assistants or nurse practitioners. And in other states they are. So there's a whole lot more to this. I'm just really conflicted about the whole thing personally as a nurse.
Right, totally understand. And Barbara, it keeps coming up from the union, is the way I understand it.
Pardon me, wait, just Elvia, I'm on a call. Come on in. I'm sorry. What, Helvin?
Oh, I'm answering Barbara. Barbara had a question in the chat about, I think it's the unions that keep bringing this up, that want to unionize. This is what I've read in several other papers, that the unions are bringing this up because they want to encourage the clinics to unionize their employees. But again, part of it is, it seems to be totally impossible that we do not, even if this passes, we do not have the medical people to go into the clinics, to provide someone there the entire time the clinic is open and have patients there.
And we don't, but I guess I'm making the statement to let all of you know that if ever you have to go into dialysis or need to talk to doctors and spread this to your families, they need to talk about other alternatives like hospice and peritoneal at home and different things like that. So I'm done. I'm off my bandwagon, but this is really, really confusing. I don't know what I'm doing.
Linda. I agree. It's very confusing. Another comment that was made in my reading is that right now clinics that are open, some are very make a lot of money, some do not, and they're balanced out.
if this goes into effect, if we do pass Proposition 29, that balance won't exist as much anymore because it will cost more across the board. And some clinics would no doubt be closed either because they could not get
I know.
get
Yeah.
physicians or people to staff them, and or they did not make money because some clinics are run by a loss. There are also clinics that are run by nonprofit organizations. Those clinics would then close, which means one, people who, and this is a three time a week, I believe 4-hour treatment.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that people who live in rural areas would not have access to clinics as close. They also do not have clinics access to hospitals because rural hospitals are closing.
Right.
And they would have to go to a hospital for treatment 3 times a week for 4 hours, which would cost substantially more, which would again go back to the state paying more than the clinics. So
Helen,
it's a very complicated situation, and we all want people to have good care, but whether this is the way to do it is questionable.
Helen, it's Barbara.
Hi, Barbara.
I'm just wondering, the unions, when you say the unions, are we talking the nursing union? Are we talking
No.
about?
It's a union that wants, it seems that it wants to unionize the people who work there, who work in the, they want to unionize the people who do work in the clinics, but in one list of people against this are people who work in the clinics, are an organization of people.
Yeah, so let me just jump in. So SEIU is a union who has been promoting this, and yes, unionize is one thing. So there are 2 issues here. So one issue is, as Linda pointed out, there are so many Medicare patients who need this, and without this, they basically die. And quality control is not there. And yes, they are getting treatment, but infections and problem complication is very, very common for those low income stuff. So they want to change that. And no, it's not going to pass. We all know that. But this needs to be brought up to the public attention. And the problem is, like, us who are here, we have good health insurance and we have access to the good dialysis facilities. Those who do not have that are not getting proper treatment. So they just want to bring it up, and we need to educate ourselves, and we need to talk about to the others, because I have actually talked to those low income, low quality dialysis patients, and it's horrifying experience, and they have to go through every single week. So that's the situation. So thank you so much for taking this for me, because I'm out of commission, so I just dumped onto Helen. So thank you.
But one other comment that I read is that, right, people who are going through dialysis are very, very sick people to begin with. They're often diabetic. And I think the average survival rate is about, or average, maybe the top, is 5 years after you begin this. So
Yes,
these are
yes, it
people who
is.
are unhealthy to begin with because of everything, because their kidneys aren't working. And they're waiting for a kidney transplant. And if they don't get one, or they're too old for one, or aren't suitable, then those are their options. So, and now we're moving on to Karen, who will do Prop 30.
And I could say that this is far simpler than the Prop 29, but as in all cases, once you start digging into something, you find that there are caveats to every proposition. This proposition is about essentially taxing those people who earn both from a couple and an individual over $2 million and using that money to subsidize zero emission vehicles and the infrastructure for ZEVs, as well as some wildfire suppression. So a yes vote would support increasing the tax on personal income over $2 million, both individuals and couples, by 1.75% and dedicating the revenue to zero emission vehicles. Vehicle subsidies and infrastructure, and additionally, wildlife suppression and prevention programs. A no vote would be no change would be made to taxes on personal income above $2 million annually. First of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about the tax, what it means. It would, as I mentioned before, increase its tax revenue on personal income over $2 million by 1.75% for individuals and married couples. If passed, it would raise the tax rate to 15.05%, which would be the highest in the nation. Hawaii is number 2 at 11%. One thing, an interesting statistic that I found out was that in 2019, those people who were making over $2 million in the state of California, there were 35,000 of couples, individuals that actually had an adjusted gross income greater than $2 million. And that contributed to 33% of the taxes of the total statewide income taxes collected, 33%. If approved, this begins January 2023 and ends January 2043. It can end earlier if California meets certain emission standards. And I believe when I was reading this, and I don't have the actual date, but it was 3 consecutive years of reducing the emission standards by 80%, I think in some date in 1990. And I do not know if the emission standards that's referred to in this particular proposition includes any emissions from wildfires. I do not know that. It's estimated to raise $3.5 to $6 billion annually. Now, if passed, how are the revenues going to be used? 80% of the revenues will be for zero emission vehicle programs. 45% of the payments to help households, businesses, and governments buy zero emission vehicles. 35% of that 80% will be used to install and operate zero emission vehicle charging stations. At least half the money must be spent on projects that benefit people living in or near heavily polluted areas and or low income communities. 20% will be used for wildfire response and prevention activities. Now, some of the Proposition 30 fiscal effects. Because of the California EV mandate, Proposition 30 will not have much effect on the number of zero emission vehicles sold in California. And this is based on the California Legislative Analyst Office. Proposition 30, however, will have an effect on who pays for those zero emission vehicles. There could be a potential decreased state and local costs for wildfire response, but this depends on how the funds, what programs the funds will be used for, how effective the funds will be, and also then the unknown of climate change and how that's going to affect fires. And the other thing that this would only impact, one of the interesting things that I found out was that California is only responsible for 1/3 of the forests or in in California. The federal government is responsible for the other 2/3. Decreased state revenue for other activities. As taxes rise, taxpayers may take steps to reduce income tax. The other piece of information that I've read in other articles is that with people being more mobile and being able to work in different states and moving, we've lost high income earners to Florida, to Texas, where they have no state income tax. And in particular, there's a concern that we could lose these high income earners who are very important to our tax base because of this additional rise in taxes. Potential reductions to other state programs to comply with the state spending limit. And this was a really interesting thing that I had not realized at this point. The state constitution actually limits the dollars spent, the dollars that the state can spend. And the limit, we're very close to the limit, and we have reached the limit. And one of these things, it's called this, I did some research on this, and it's called the state appropriations limit. And it was established with Prop 4 in 1979, and it was later amended by Prop 98 in 1988 and Prop 11 in 1990, not Prop 11, Prop 111 in 1990, to limit the state and local spending limits to real inflation adjusted per person government spending under 1978 to 79 levels. And if the state revenues go above that limit over 2 consecutive years, the state constitution requires that the state split the excess between taxpayer rebates and additional spending in schools. And this proposition would generate about $1.5 to $3 billion that would contribute to this limit. And reductions would have to be made to an equal amount of spending to make room for the new required spending on ZEV programs and wildfires. So nothing is free in all of this case. So what you pay for one thing, you may have to reduce in another area. And in particular, I think this is one of the reasons the California Teachers Association is opposing this, because they're concerned that it's going to impact state funding for schools. Arguments in favor: it provides a dedicated funding stream for California's 2 leading causes of air pollution, gas vehicles and wildfires. It's better to assist the state to meet the state's climate goals, and it assists in transitioning to zero emission vehicles. And a whole slew of people are supporting this, including the California Democratic Party, Yes on 30 Clean Air Initiative, LIFT, California's, it goes on and on. There are very many people that are supporting it. And you may have noticed that LIFT is supporting it, and you may have seen some of the commercials by Gavin Newsom, our governor, that is claiming that this is a corporate sponsored bill, which it is. And though LIFT has contributed $35 million to support this proposition. Without LIFT, this proposition would not, I don't believe, have occurred. Maybe Uber would have contributed the money for this. And the state air pollution regulators mandated rideshare companies use zero emission vehicles for 90% of the miles drivers travel by 2030. And the comment that I had read was that though rideshare vehicles are a relatively small portion of California's vehicle fleet, they often travel many miles beyond the average of other vehicles. For example, if I want to go to the grocery store, I have a trip to and from the grocery store. If I call a rideshare company, they have to come from somewhere else to pick me up, take me to the grocery store and take me back, and then go somewhere else. So it's more vehicle emissions would be caused by rideshare companies. So the California Air Resources Board made this mandate for rideshare companies. And there was a San Francisco Chronicle quote that was given by a gentleman who follows, a Wall Street analyst who follows Lyft and Uber. And he made this comment: without state support, the company would face a very steep uphill battle trying to meet California's clean air rules. Proposition 30, arguments against. The state has the highest income, gas, and sales tax in the country. Couple that with inflation and a possible recession. And if there is a recession and there's funds that are mandated to be spent by the taxpayers to be spent on zero emission vehicles, the legislature does not have any flexibility in moving money around once they're contributing, or once this proposition would go into effect. Let's see, there would be ballot box budgeting. A special interest such as Lyft bypasses electrical officials or elected officials and tries to achieve budgeting favors through the electorate. And then because of constitutional spending limits, Proposition 30 will reduce the spending on other programs. And the California Teachers Association, there was a woman who is the California Teachers Association Executive Director, said that it was written deliberately to get around California's school funding law. And so I do not understand the mechanisms of how that would happen, but the claims have been made in several sources. Any questions?
Yeah, I just want to mention that this proposition really competes with Proposition 28.
Oh, it actually does. I mean, it's saying you have to use this money for that, and you know, it's really tying the legislature to certain funding streams until 2043.
And it really does, you know, try to bypass the legislature to spend public funds to help a private company. So
Yes, it does. Any other questions or comments? The next proposition is Mary. Mary's going to be talking about that, and it's Proposition 31.
Hi. So the slide for what it does and does not do, yes vote on Prop 31 upholds the contested legislation, Senate Bill 793, SB 793, which would ban the sale of flavored tobacco products. A yes means SB 793 will go into effect, and we'll talk about what that means. A no repeals the contested legislation, and Senate Bill 793 will not go into effect, thus keeping the sale of flavored tobacco legal in California. So here's a little background. The referendum challenging a 2020 law prohibiting retail sale of most flavored tobacco products and tobacco flavor enhancers, Prop 31 prohibits in-person stores and vending machines from selling these products. It does not ban shisha, which is a hookah tobacco sold and used at the store, or certain tobaccos or loose leaf tobacco. The proposition does define flavored tobacco products as those that have a flavor apart from the regular tobacco flavor. For example, a flavor could include fruit, mint, or vanilla, and there are just dozens of flavors out there. You might note that the minty kind of menthol flavors are marketed heavily toward African Americans. As part of the proposition, a $250 penalty is charged for each violation, and a majority of voters will be required to approve this 2020 state law before it can take effect. So as of 2020, California and Massachusetts had adopted bans on the sale of flavored tobacco products, including flavored e-cigarettes and menthol cigarettes. And a lot of that equipment you might see in the pictures on the slide. We in Livermore were, I believe, the second city in the nation to prohibit some of these materials. New York and Rhode Island had adopted bans on the sale of flavored e-cigarettes, but not menthol cigarettes. And again, those are targeting one particular population. In 2017, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors passed an ordinance, they were the first, that banned the sale of flavored tobacco. R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company launched a veto referendum campaign to repeal the ordinance. This drive was successful, placing the ordinance on the ballot at that time as Proposition E. Voters approved Proposition E, upholding the board's ordinance by 68.4%. They voted to adopt the ordinance, and Livermore was not far behind. What are the arguments for yes? Oh, and again, there was a referendum challenging all of this. The arguments for yes are presented by various people. State Senator Jerry Hill, the legislative sponsor of SB 793, said, using candy fruit and other alluring flavors, the tobacco industry weaponized its tactics to beguile a new generation into nicotine addiction while keeping longtime users hooked. SB 793, which again, we are deciding whether or not that will go into effect, breaks big tobacco's death grips. Yes supporters include Kaiser Health Plan, Committee to Protect California Kids, Governor Newsom, Peace and Freedom Party of California, California Teachers Association, Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, the American Cancer Society, Action Network, and let's see, a lot more. According to Ballotpedia, other supporters include, and these are editorial supporters from newspapers, the LA Times, Santa Cruz Sentinel, Bay Area Reporter, and on, East Bay Times, Michael Bloomberg, and then 84 of 89 legislative Democrats and a quarter of legislative Republicans supported, that was 8 out of 30, supported the measure at the time that it was being voted on. One member voted against the bill and the remainder were absent or abstained. Donors in support spent a total of roughly $4,500,000 as of October 5th. And against, let's see, I don't have that. Where is that? Funding from opponents right now, as of October 5th, amounts to almost $23 million. So they, the supporters of this measure are vastly outspent by the tobacco industry and others. Let's see, arguments against include, let's see, the legislative analyst estimate of net state and local government fiscal impacts show decreased state tobacco tax revenues ranging from tens of millions of dollars annually to around $100 million annually. And then last year's state tobacco revenue tax was about $2 billion. This revenue loss would reduce funding for programs such as, and this is ironic, to funding healthcare. 56% of the taxes fund healthcare. Early childhood programs, 21%. Tobacco control programs, 12%. So they're actually funding programs to stop themselves. Medical research, which they will need for tobacco, 4%, and other miscellaneous, 7%. Tobacco taxes are one of the funding sources for Medi-Cal. Note, the FDA has proposed banning menthol cigarettes and flavored cigars. So if the FDA finalizes its ban, then the revenue loss due to the proposition would be smaller. So this may be affected by some federal decisions. No supporters include the Republican Party of California, ITG Brands LLC, Philip Morris USA, RG Reynolds, all these tobacco companies. This was interesting. Swedish Match, North America, and the National Association of Tobacco Outlets. And let's see. I talked about funding. Let's see. Changes in state and local government healthcare costs are uncertain. State and local governments pay for healthcare for their employees and for qualifying low-income people. This proposition likely would reduce tobacco use, leading to better health. So in the short term, that would save us some money. This would likely reduce some healthcare costs for state and local governments, but that amount of savings is uncertain. So that would offset some of the tax losses. Over time, better health could lengthen some people's lives, which would increase healthcare costs, given that passage of the proposition could result in both healthcare savings and increased healthcare costs for state and local governments over time. The resulting long-term net change in state and local government healthcare costs is uncertain. Onward. So, cigarettes. Smoking cigarettes is a common way to use tobacco. And aside from the naturally occurring flavor, there may be many other flavors. There seems to be some background noise here. Is everybody muted?
Mary,
Yeah.
we are getting a little bit short, and overall, we know what this is. So, is it okay to end?
Let's see. Let me just double check here. Okay, fine. We can end there and then move on to, well, that ends it for the propositions. And now we're going to move on to the measures, starting with Christine, who is presenting Measure D.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for hanging in with us. So I'm covering Alameda County Measure D, which is basically wanting to amend another Measure D, which the voters passed 22 years ago in 2000. So a yes vote for this measure this time around would continue to prohibit uncontrolled development in designated protected open space and agricultural areas. It would allow expanded storage, processing, and retail facilities for wineries, olive presses to serve the public. It would also allow ranchers and equestrian facilities to provide more space for covered corrals, for practice areas for people learning to ride horses, and for performance areas. A no vote would keep the limits set by the 2000 Measure D initiative. And basically the 2000 Measure initiative was called the Save Agriculture and Open Space Lands. And it was primarily to enhance the agriculture and preserve agriculture in the unincorporated areas of Alameda County. So some background on this measure. In 2000, as it was passed, and it addressed only large parcel agriculture, LPAs for short, and resource management, RMs for short, for non-residential buildings. So an LPA and an RM property was allowed a maximum building intensity of 0.01 floor area ratio, or FAR, for these non-residential buildings, plus an additional floor area ratio of 0.025 for greenhouses only. So an example would have been for a 100-acre parcel, a 0.01 floor area ratio would allow for a building of 1 acre of a non-residential building. So that would be the size that would be possible for a non-residential building. So 22 years have passed, and from my reading, 2020, 2021 primarily, the agricultural community and equestrian facility owners and the wine industry indicated that the restrictions imposed on them by Measure D actually negatively impacted their businesses. So studies were done, and from my reading, studies were done by the Alameda County Local Agency Information Commission, LAFCO, and the Alameda County Community Development Agency Planning Department, primarily. As a result of that, they made recommendations to the Alameda County Planning Commission and they to the Alameda County Board of Supervisors, who then voted to put this measure on the November 22 ballot. So what the result of that was, in the LPA areas only, the floor area ratio would be increased to 0.025 for all types of agricultural buildings. For the 2000 measure limited it to greenhouses only. So also in parcels designated as resource management and large parcel areas, it would also allow a 0.025 floor area ratio for covered equestrian arenas to a maximum of 60,000 square feet. So the arguments for passing Measure D, and some of this comes from the voter information guide, it would continue to prohibit the uncontrolled development in the designated protecting open space and agricultural areas of the county. It will continue to prohibit structures on ridge lines or hilltops, or where they would be projecting above if they were to be viewed from public roads and other public viewpoint areas. It would allow for expanded storage and processing and retail facilities for wineries, including visitor centers and processing facilities, as I said, for olive presses, and to serve the public in that way. It would allow ranches and equestrian facilities to provide more space for the covered corrals, practice areas for people learning to ride horses, and for performance areas. So the argument against Alameda County Measure D, the opponents say that it would only benefit rich, large landowners. It would destroy more county hillsides and watersheds, and that low-income housing is prohibited on Measure D areas. So supporters are the original proponents of the 2000 measure. So they basically saw that there was a need to make some amendments, and chief among them is Dick Schneider, who was a co-author of the 2000 Measure D. Also, supporting is the agriculture and equestrian interests and the South Livermore wine industry, the Livermore City Council, and County Supervisors Nate Miley, Richard Valle, and Lori Souza of the Tri-Valley Conservancy Board. She's the Tri-Valley Conservancy Board Chair. So I tried to keep this a little short. Are there any questions that I might be able to answer or perhaps not answer?
Well, I have a question. On the last slide, you said that affordable housing is prevented on Measure D lands. Was that already the case? Or does this measure place additional restrictions on Measure D lands?
I believe
It's my understanding it was already
Yes.
already the case. I mean, I think the whole idea of the original measure was to prevent development that might negatively impact the agricultural open lands in the county. And so urban growth limits, have something to say about that as well. So to me, the fact that they say low-income housing is prohibited is kind of a non-starter. It's for people who really feel like we need more low-income housing, which I agree with, that it just doesn't fit into this, in my opinion.
Okay, so again, to reinforce, this measure is not increasing any restrictions, it's just easing one or few basic restrictions.
correct.
That's right. It is easy agricultural, structures. They're allowed to be somewhat larger than the original Alameda County 2000 measure allowed.
Yeah, so to complement that, so the Livermore Wine Grower Association in the South Livermore wine industry, we are trying to actually make this a wine destination. And to do that, we need to actually have certain facilities to be put in. Right now, it's not available. So only the ones which was grandfathered in, like Fuentes, Concanon has a big facilities, and there is no other thing coming in because we are not allowed to build. But we need processing part, and if we want to look like Napa, we need to actually have some nice looking wine tasting place, event place. We want to have some of those. So it will be still under control, but it will allow to develop a little bit more those type of the wine stuff is one thing. And of course, horse industry, it's just a tourist industry. If we want to promote that, we need this. That's what I understand. I'm Kyoko.
Christine or Kyoko, do you know if Supervisor Halbert is in favor of this? Did he vote for it when the supervisors passed it?
He should be, so I don't know why his name is not on it.
The names that I listed came from the voter information guide, and Halbert's was not on it. I do not know how he voted when the supervisors voted to put it on the ballot.
I think it was unanimous.
Or the Alameda County Planning Commission voted unanimously to go for this amendment, so that they made that recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. But how each of the Board of Supervisors voted on that, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I just read an article that said it was 3 in favor, 1 abstention, 1 absence. And so I was just curious if Halbert was one of where he stood on that. I can find out.
Yeah, okay. Are there any more questions? If not, then let's move on to Joanne again, who is going to talk about local school board measure G.
Yes, this is a facility bonds measure. And issuing bonds is the only way that the school district can make major improvements to the school facilities. There's no other way to pay for it. I want to start off with that. So a yes vote on Measure G would issue 450 million in bonds, would levy a property tax of approximately 6 cents per $100 assessed value. Now that's assessed value, not market value, with no exemption for seniors. It would serve to upgrade classrooms, training facilities. It would improve safety and security systems. It would repair and replace deteriorating facilities and keep instructional technology up to date, and it would support STEM instruction. It would provide independent oversight like we have now, and audits, ongoing audits. It would not fund administrator salaries by state law, and it would allow the district to compete for matching state funds. There are grants available that we would be able to apply for. A no vote would not increase property taxes and would leave facilities in the deteriorated condition they're in now, not replace portable classrooms, not upgrade safety and security, and not allow instruction technology to become outdated, and would allow instructional technology to become outdated. So some of our schools were built 60 years ago and really desperately need to be modernized to provide up-to-date classroom technology and to meet current health and safety codes. This measure would ensure that all students are learning in safe and modern classrooms. It would provide updated classrooms, science labs, job training facilities, and allow students to meet rising academic standards and serve our community for decades to come. All the funds would be used locally and cannot be used for administrator or teacher salaries or benefits. This was proposed by the school district. It's supported by the Livermore Valley Chamber of Commerce, Livermore Valley Education Foundation, and a whole host of endorsers like Eric Swalwell, Livermore Mayor and City Council, and so forth. The arguments against, on average, property taxes will increase by $973.83. Don't ask me where that number comes from. I don't know how they calculate it. And a big one is there's no senior exemption. With the parcel tax that we had with Measure A, there was an exemption that seniors could apply for. That's not provided in this. Another argument is that it's not necessary. The state inspected all LVJ USD buildings and found them to be in, quote, good condition, as shown in the 2022 State Accountability Report cards. Also, they say Measure G is a blank check, with schools getting only 44.1% of the funds. And the large debt only benefits Wall Street. People saying this are the Libertarian Party of California, Alameda County Taxpayers Association, and good old Livermore resident Alan Heckman, who I'm still in court with on Measure A. It is a $450 million general obligation bond. And it would pass with 55% of the vote. Measure A had to have 75% of the vote. And as we said, it'll be about $60 per 100,000 in assessed home value annually. Our schools are really in bad condition. They are old and deteriorating. We have portable classrooms that are over 30 years old. They're only meant to be temporary, and they've lived long beyond their viable lives. And we just don't have the same quality as other school districts in the facilities that we're able to offer kids and to prepare them to go out in the world, either to go to college or to find a job. As for the senior exemption, that's a sticking point, yes. But actually, most seniors have had their homes a long time, and therefore they pay less taxes on them than newer homeowners. And, you know, everybody paid taxes towards the schools that these people went to. It's an ongoing thing. Every so often, we have to pay for new facilities, and we're way overdue at 60 years. Our facilities now have to look into the future. We have athletic facilities that kids can't even access. They can't practice. The tennis courts have weeds growing up through the cracks. It's just really a bad situation. And one of the things nobody talks about is the potential liability with really severely deteriorated facilities. We heard a story just today in talking with Steve Druin that his wife knows of a situation in another district, not here, but a teacher was sitting with her circle of small kids in a reading circle, and the ceiling collapsed on them, injuring the teacher. You know, if things like that happen, the school district would have to pay very large amounts of money. There's a study that we're doing right now on Measure G to calculate the cost of new facilities versus the cost of trying to maintain facilities that have gone beyond their life expectancy period, to get a more comparative analysis of the expenditures under this bond. You know, they say that out of this 450 million, you know, with interest and costs, it'll be more like $1 billion over 30 years. But I see question, Laurie.
Thanks. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt what you were saying there. I just wanted to understand the numbers I'm seeing. Is this will be increased by roughly $1,000 or increased to? Because when I do the math, I end up with a different number based on what I think the average property value is. So I just want to understand these numbers.
Well, I think it boils down to, you know, how you estimate the average property value to begin with. And that's what the opponents say it will be. I think our figures are more in the $300 to $400 range per year.
Okay, that's what I calculated.
Well, I would just talk about my own property taxes, and it looks to be about $800. So it's not 300, but it just depends on how your property is assessed.
And how long you've owned it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is residential, not commercial.
Right.
Okay. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And Joanne, is this a 30-year bond?
Yes, it is.
And how did they determine the success, or when the, you said it would take 55% of the voters saying yes to pass it. How did they determine that number? You said that previously it was a higher value for other measures.
Well, Measure A was a different kind of measure. It was a parcel tax. It was under a different provision. So a bond like this passes by 55%. And Measure J, we could compare this to Measure J, which was the existing facilities bond that was passed several years ago, 6 years ago, actually. That was a $245 million bond measure. And it has almost all the projects have been completed under Measure J, and they've been completed on time and within budget. It's had very strict oversight, as will Measure G. So the money is being well spent and well supervised. If I sound like a proponent, I am. Any other questions?
Yeah, Joanne, if this is too complicated a question, feel free to ignore it. But I was wondering why only bonds can pay for shortfalls in school budget, and why, for instance, couldn't the city contribute some money to this?
I don't know. It's state law, I believe. This is the only way that school districts can raise money for facilities. But with this measure, however, there is the possibility of getting matching funds. There will be grants that the district's going to apply for to match part of the funding, part of the Measure G funds that are raised. So we'd be getting a little more bang for the buck. I hope that helps to answer your question. We could always apply for grants, but to raise the kind of money that's necessary for facilities, it has to be by a bond measure. Okay, Christy says it's state law that was set in the 70s. So there are no other options.
I would guess that this is somehow tied to the lovely Proposition 13.
Yes. All right, so thank you. And now I'd like to turn this over for our final measure, Measure P, Mary.
Hi, so Measure P is a very popular measure, it appears. According to the Livermore, California voter guide, passage of P would allow the city to extend sewer lines so property owners south of the city can switch away from septic tanks that are contaminating the groundwater. The sewer services would be extended along Buena Vista Avenue between East Avenue and Tesla Road, then down Tesla Road and south along part of Greenville Road. This measure requires a simple majority to pass. A no vote on P would mean that South Livermore urban growth boundary policies in the city of Livermore's general plan would not be changed. And here's the background. The 1993 South Livermore plan adopted by the city and Alameda County established a goal of 5,000 acres planted in wine grapes. Today, plantings have plateaued at 2,800 acres, with the prospect of 1,900 acres of grapes in the ground 20 years or more old to be replaced by 2030. The cost of planting and maintaining vineyards over the past 30 years has increased, primarily due to lack of sufficient supportive infrastructure, such as a sewer system. Arguments for. Although this 5-mile extension is estimated to cost $11.5 million, county officials have agreed to contribute $6.5 million, which would be used to leverage state and federal funds to cover more of the cost, according to city staff. Also, existing wineries would pay to hook up to the sewer instead of septic, resulting in cleaner groundwater. Connection fees will also help pay for the system. If this all occurs, South Livermore can attract new wineries, which are currently not an option due to groundwater contamination and a resulting ban on new septic systems. By replacing the area's tired septic systems with a model that will be able to accommodate an influx of tourists to the area, the region can look ahead to becoming a destination location. Nearly 3,000 acres of aging vineyards are nearing the end of their life cycles. The cost of their replacement cannot be justified by wine growers unless there is sufficient demand from local wineries. If the region is unable to support these wineries with something as basic as sewage service, that will not be possible. With this change, the area can support a resort hotel and mid-sized wineries needed to promote the growth of agro-tourism. Larger wineries cannot be built without an economical way to dispose of their processed wastewater. And without bigger wineries, the vineyards will not be replanted because there won't be demand for the grapes. A successful agricultural economy will protect against pressure to turn our open spaces into housing divisions, which has been one of the fears. People who doubted this would be a good measure were worried that it would lead to housing subdivisions in what is now an open space area. This change would assist a struggling industry that Livermore in Alameda County should protect for the economy and environment of the region. Wildfire protection will be enhanced. The vineyards make excellent fire breaks. The urban growth boundary will not be changed. Development restrictions imposed by Measure D and the South Livermore Area Plan will not be changed. So those were the arguments for, and there are a lot of them, and arguments against. Well, there does not appear to be any opposition to the measure. Early concerns about cost and housing development appear to have been resolved. Let's see. The people and groups supporting include all local newspapers and the San Jose Mercury, the City of Livermore, Livermore Valley Chamber of Commerce, Friends of Livermore, local wine growers, of course, and Zone 7 Water Agency. No opponents are listed. This was an easy measure to discuss. So are there any questions? Lorene?
Yeah, I have to correct something. Zone 7 has not supported it. It's not that we're against it. We have limits on what we can and cannot support. So I just want to make sure.
Well, thank you for that correction. Yeah. I read it in an article, which is apparently not true.
Yes. So yeah, you have to be careful how you say that. I have to be careful because I'm not really in a position to speak for Zone 7, but I will say something that has been said publicly by Zone 7, and that is, we like the idea of getting nitrates out of water, so we can say that much, but we can't openly support it. As an individual, I could or couldn't, and I'm actually, again, don't take this negatively because I kind of don't think this is a bad idea, but I'm not in a position to support it because I'm not a Livermore resident. And so I don't feel right telling Livermore residents what to do. But I will say on a personal level, I like the idea of getting nitrates out of groundwater. So I'll go as far as to say that. But Zone 7 is available to talk about effects of this if people want. So we are able to do that. So I think there might be a fact sheet that was put together and whatnot. So there is information there to help people make a decision. But I just wanted to make sure because of certain legal restrictions on what we can and cannot do when we support things and whatnot. I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you, Laureen.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? I don't see any hands. Any other questions? If not, then we are at the end of our presentation. And I want to thank the Livermore Indivisible Steering Committee members who worked so hard gathering information, organizing, and getting the word out. Marla, Helen, Joanne, and Karen, and Kyoko. Today's meeting has been recorded and will be posted on our website, livermoreindivisible.org, in a few days. You can scroll down to the events area to view today's meeting. There, you will also find a spreadsheet listing the pros and cons. I think it's there, right, Marla? Supporters and
I
opponents
haven't put it there yet. It will be there.
in a few days. Supporters and opponents for each proposition and measure we've discussed today. So again, things will be available on our website in a few days, the information that was presented here. Our website also includes recordings of recent candidate forums and interviews we have held or co-sponsored as part of our civic engagement commitment to inform voters. We hope you do get informed and vote. Thank you for being here to do that, by the way. And be sure to learn about down ballot as well as up ballot candidates, as extremist elements supported by big money are putting their focus there this year. Thank you so much for your interest today, and have a good week.
Thanks, everyone.